everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Learning Kitchen Live. My name is Colleen and I'm one of the dietitians here at Community Servings. Today we're going to be preparing a butternut squash curry with spinach, and as always the recipe will be linked in the comments. Feel free to fill out the survey that will be there as well, and as always a big thank you to our sponsors over at Boston Scientific. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with some of our base ingredients and then work backwards today, just so that has some time to cook. So to get started with, we're going to add some canola oil. You could also use olive oil to coat our pan, and then we can start sauteing some of our ingredients here. So this calls for 2 tablespoons of canola oil or olive oil. I like using a plant-based oil because it does have some of those healthier fats. So good for heart health. Once that warms up, we're going to add some of our base ingredients here and get started. So it is now September. I wanted to introduce a nice fall recipe, and butternut squash is one of my favorite flavors of fall. It's such a versatile ingredient, so it can be used for savory and sweet dishes. So today we're going to use it with a curry sauce. Curry literally just translates to sauce from a language that's spoken in the area of southern India. So that's all that means, and it's a blend of spices that we'll get into in just a few minutes here. Alright, so that's starting to warm up. We're going to add our chopped onion. And we'll let that saute for a couple of minutes, just until it starts to turn a translucent or almost like a clear color. I was mentioning earlier that curry just means sauce, and it's usually made up of a blend of different spices like chili powder, cumin, turmeric, cinnamon, some different peppers like ground white pepper, black pepper, and red pepper. There's often some dry or ground mustard in there as well. So you can buy it pre-mixed at the store, or if you have some of those spices at home instead, you could just use a blend of those to make your own curry powder. It's also a really great way to add flavor to a dish without adding salt or sodium. That's something we talk about a lot here on Learning Kitchen Live, and this recipe has less than 300 milligrams of sodium per serving, which is a pretty low sodium dish. So again, good for heart health. Most of the sodium is coming from our canned tomatoes, but we're not adding any additional salt to the dish other than that. So those are starting to get nice and softened, a little bit clear or translucent in color. Then we're going to add our chopped garlic. So I have 3 cloves of garlic here. I like using garlic to flavor things as well. Another really great way to add flavor without the salt or the sodium. And garlic has a lot of good anti-inflammatory properties. So can prevent inflammation in your body, can also help with preventing the common cold or fighting off illness, especially as we're entering September and flu season is around the corner. Adding some garlic to your dishes can help with your immune system. Alright. So that's nice and softened. Then we're going to add the rest of our spices. So in addition to our 2 teaspoons of curry powder, which is that blend of spices I mentioned earlier, we also have some ground ginger, which also has a lot of those really great anti-inflammatory and immune system benefits as garlic. There's also some crushed red pepper flakes, and then a teaspoon of coriander. If you've never used coriander before, it actually comes from the same plant as cilantro. Cilantro is the leaf portion of the plant, whereas the coriander is the seed. So the coriander spice is ground up seed from the same plant as that. Has a very different flavor than cilantro, so it's definitely worth giving a try in your cooking if you've never used it before. So I know you can't see this right now, but this blend of spices gives it a really colorful appearance. So there's a lot of bright yellow that's coming from the turmeric and the curry powder. A nice warm color and flavor from all of the herbs and spices that we've added in there. Okay, so now we're going to add our butternut squash. I have about 4 cups of pre-chopped butternut squash, and I'm going to show you how to chop one in a minute here, but they can be a little bit tricky, so I wanted to have one ready ahead of time. So we're going to add that. We're also going to add our crushed tomatoes. So I have fire roasted tomatoes, just 1 can. And then some water and some milk for all of this to simmer together. And I'm using a skim milk. You could use 1% at home, or if you have a dairy allergy, any sort of non-dairy milk would be fine as well. It just adds a little bit of creamy texture to the curry dish. So now that that's all together in our pot, we're going to bring it to a boil and let that cook for about 15 minutes or so. So while that's happening, I wanted to talk all about butternut squash today. That's our ingredient spotlight for the week. So butternut squash is usually ripe in September or October in this part of the country, and when you're looking for a fresh squash at the store or at the farmer's market, there's 3 good things to look for. 1, you want the skin to be matte in appearance as opposed to shiny. If it's still shiny, it's usually not ripe yet. The second thing to look for would be a very tough skin, so you shouldn't be able to pierce it with your fingernail or with a utensil. If it's able to be pierced pretty easily or pretty quickly, that's a sign that it's still not ripe yet or it's too soft. So you want it to be nice and hard. And along with that, when you knock on the shell, it should sound hollow. So those are 3 indicators to know that your butternut squash is ripe and ready to be used at home. From there, there's a couple of different ways that you can attack chopping this. I'll show you my favorite way. Get some of this stuff out of the way for you. So I like to take off the top and the bottom first. They can be a little tricky or a little tough to cut through, so you definitely want to use one of your larger or stronger knives that you have at home. And then I just have a bowl here for all of my scraps to make things a little bit easier. And I'm going to keep an eye on this while I'm doing that. From there, I usually like to cut it in half right where it starts to widen into a bulb, because that's where all of the seeds are. So that makes it easier to get the seeds out if you separate it into 2 portions like that. So we'll cut this bulb half lengthwise, and that's where all of your seeds are. We're not going to use these in today's recipe, but these are edible, just like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds. You could save them and roast them for a nice salty, crunchy, savory snack. I'm just going to scoop them out today with a spoon. So why do I love butternut squash? It's got a lot of nutrition benefits. It's high in vitamin A, which is good for your vision. I think that's something we've talked about before. Anything that has that really bright orange color, like carrots or orange bell peppers, pumpkin, that's all a sign of vitamin A. Butternut squash is also high in vitamin C, which is good for your immune system. It's also really high in potassium. So that potassium kind of works in opposition with sodium in your body. We talk a lot about having low sodium meals for lowering your blood pressure, but also having high potassium meals can help with lowering your blood pressure too. So this is starting to come to a boil. I'm just going to reduce the heat to a simmer and cover that. And then we'll come back to that in about 10-15 minutes just to see how things are going there. In the meantime, I'm going to continue scooping out the seeds for my butternut squash. Another really good benefit of butternut squash is it's high in fiber. So this meal is a little bit high on the carbohydrate side, but about 10 grams of that are coming from fiber. So the fiber in the butternut squash, as well as the rice, the spinach, some of the other ingredients that we're going to add, those are all good for your digestive system. Again, good for blood pressure and heart health, good for diabetes, so lots of benefits to the fiber as well. So we've got our butternut squash cut into a couple of chunks here. Got all the seeds out. From here, what I like to do is peel it. You could use a vegetable peeler. I'm going to use a knife just because the skin can be pretty thick, so you have to get through a couple of layers there. And I think it's a little bit easier just to take it off with a knife. And you want to make sure you get down to that bright orange color. The first couple layers are a little bit lighter, and that can be kind of bitter. You don't want to eat that part of the squash. This is a great dish to use as a side. It would pair well with a piece of chicken, or if you wanted to have it as a vegetarian dish on its own, even adding some tofu or chickpeas would pair really well with this. Another really good benefit of this meal, it's 100% plant-based as we're preparing it, so that means it's cholesterol-free. You're not getting any animal-based fats. We're using a skim milk, so no cholesterol there, which is, again, really good for heart health. Now we're down to the easy part of chopping our butternut squash, which is just cutting it into smaller dice-sized pieces. This is what I did ahead of time to prepare the squash that we added into our curry dish, but you could also use this and just stick it right in the freezer to use for a later date. So once you have it diced into small pieces like this, you could just stick it on a piece of parchment paper on a baking sheet and put it in the freezer for a couple of minutes. Once it's fully frozen, transition it into a Tupperware, and then you can just pull it out of the freezer when you're ready to use it again. I mentioned before that butternut squash is really versatile. It can be used diced like this in different dishes like pastas or stir fries. It can be used pureed as a sauce for pasta or as a soup. It can also be used in sweet dishes like an apple crisp with some butternut squash. So it pairs well with a variety of different flavors. Just gonna check on this and see how we're doing. Continue dicing up the rest of my squash here. Other nutrition benefits to this meal, so we're going to be serving it over brown rice, which is a whole grain. Those whole grains are good for heart health, good for diabetes. It's a little bit of a healthier source of carbohydrates than some of the white and refined grains. Again, a lot of fiber coming from that. We're also going to be adding in a whole bag of spinach. You could use any sort of leafy green that you enjoy. Kale would go well with this as well, but that's another way to boost the nutrition value of this dish, just with that leafy green. Spinach in particular is very high in iron, which can be hard to get if you don't include any meat in your diet. A lot of our meat or a lot of our iron intake comes from meat sources. So including leafy greens, beans and legumes, like if you added some chickpeas to this, that's another great way to boost the iron content of this meal and make sure that you're getting enough of that if you follow a purely plant-based diet. I'd love to hear in the comments if anyone does use butternut squash at home, how they prefer to prepare it, or if they have a favorite recipe. Feel free to type that in the comments. Yes.
Can you roast butternut squash like you would potatoes for a side dish?
Absolutely, that's a great suggestion. So butternut squash, you can prepare it on top of the stove like we are right now. You can also roast it in the oven just with a little bit of olive oil or canola oil and your favorite herbs and spices. A really good side dish, so that's a great suggestion. Also, when it's in season, like it is right now, it's pretty affordable. So this meal, apart from the olive oil and the spices, which I already had, when you break it down per serving, it costs less than $3 per serving. So very affordable, home-cooked meal that you could prepare at home in probably under 20 minutes.
How do you store a butternut squash?
You can keep it on your counter for several weeks before it goes bad. Again, just look for those signs that it's matte on the outside, that it's hard, it's not turning soft, and that when you knock on it, it sounds hollow. Those are good signs that it's still ripe and you're able to use it. You can also keep it in the refrigerator. I prefer to keep it on just a shelf in my kitchen, and it'll stay shelf stable that way for you. When I'm cutting any sort of vegetable, I like to get to the largest flat surface as quick as I can. That way it's less likely to slide around on me. So as I'm cutting up the rest of this, that's why I cut it in half that way. Just to be a little bit safer with my knife. So So really once we get around some of those seeds and get the peel off, it's pretty easy to dice up, and like I said, you could do this ahead of time, put it in the freezer, so that when you want to prepare it later down the road, you can just cook it right from there. You don't even need to thaw it ahead of time. You could just put it right in the oven from the freezer. Finish chopping the rest of these here. Anything in the squash family this time of year is just a really good vegetable to experiment with. I know we prepared zucchini a couple of weeks ago. We have acorn squash and some of the winter squashes coming up soon, so hopefully we'll have some more recipes there. So one butternut squash was about 4 cups after it was chopped up, which is what our recipe called for. But again, while that was cooking, I just wanted to demonstrate how to cut one of these, because they can be a little bit tricky. So we're going to use this for something else later on today, but let's check on our curry here and see how things are going. I think it's been about 10 minutes. And I can tell that the butternut squash is starting to get soft and tender by pressing it on the spoon. If you had a fork, you should be able to pierce through it pretty easily now, but it doesn't take very long to cook. So we're just going to turn the heat off now. And the last part to this dish is to add in our spinach. So I have a bag here of 4 cups of spinach, which sounds like a lot, but once we add it in and it starts to wilt, it really loses a lot of that volume, so it cooks down pretty quickly. We'll add a couple of handfuls here at a time. Be sure to turn the heat off before you do this. So it's still over the same burner there to give it a little bit of warmth, but we don't want it to really start to cook. We just want to add it in until it starts to wilt a little bit. The water and the milk that we added earlier, blended with the spices, really made a nice sauce here. So it's a little liquidy. Once we add it to the rice, all of that will get absorbed too. So you can see what the wilted spinach looks like now that that's added. I'm going to add the rest of this in. And so this all came together in maybe 20 minutes. I prepared my brown rice ahead of time. I usually like to cook that before I'm even hungry because it does take a little bit to cook, so about 40 minutes for that to simmer. And then we're just going to serve this over top of that, and I'll show you what our final plated curry butternut squash looks like. Here's some brown rice that we have. I just cooked that in water, so again, no added salt there. You could use broth or add some additional garlic, ginger, some of those same spices just to kick up the flavor a little bit more. Another nice thing about preparing this dish ahead of time is as you put it in the refrigerator and save it for leftovers, all of those flavors are going to continue to marinate together and only get stronger. So tomorrow, this is going to taste even more fantastic than it will today. we'll add that over top of our rice, and then the final thing you could do is add some chopped peanuts as a garnish. That gives it just a little bit of a crunch and some of that salty taste that you're looking for. So there's our final curried butternut squash with spinach and brown rice. Again, feel free to experiment with chicken or tofu, chickpeas, another protein source at home. But I hope that you give this recipe a try. Again, you'll find that in the comments section, as well as some more information about butternut squash, our ingredient spotlight. Thank you to our sponsor over at Boston Scientific, and we hope that you join us next week.